The evening sky turned dark as Mary Johnson pulled her car into the slow lane of the highway. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric surgeon. Her eyes were heavy, but her heart felt light. Earlier that day, she had saved a 5-year-old boy who came in with a burst appendix. The surgery was tough, but seeing the relief on his parents' faces made everything worth it. Marie checked her watch, 8:45 p.m. Her husband Thomas would be away for at least another week on what he simply called an assignment. Being married to a Delta Force commander meant getting used to mysterious absences and vague explanations. She had learned to live with the worry, the secrecy, and the pride that came with loving someone who served their country in ways that could never be discussed at dinner parties. The flash of blue lights in her rearview mirror startled her. Mary's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she carefully signaled and pulled over to the shoulder. She wasn't speeding, maybe a taillight was out. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her purse to get her license and registration ready. Before she could find her wallet, bright flashlights blinded her through the driver's side window. 2 officers stood with their hands on their holsters. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands up," one shouted. Marie's heart jumped to her throat. "Officers, what's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Out of the car now. Hands where we can see them." Confused but not wanting to make things worse, Marie slowly opened her door and stepped out with her hands raised above her head. The cool evening air made her shiver, or maybe it was fear. "I'm a doctor at Memorial Hospital. I just finished my shift. Whatever this is about." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the taller officer ordered, cutting her off. Before she could say another word, Marie was spun around and pushed against her car. Cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists, tight enough to hurt. She winced but didn't cry out. "You're making a mistake," she said, her cheek pressed against the roof of her car. "My ID is in my purse. I'm Dr. Marie Johnson." The second officer was already searching her car while the first one recited her rights. "We have a suspect matching your description who robbed the Quick Mart on Pine Street about an hour ago. Black female, mid-30s, driving a silver sedan." Marie's mind raced. Pine Street was on the other side of town. That's impossible. I was in surgery until 7:30. There are cameras in the hospital parking lot. My colleagues can verify. "Save it for the station," the officer said, guiding her toward the patrol car. Neighbors in passing cars slowed down to watch. Marie recognized Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down, whose grandson she had treated for asthma last year. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. Marie looked away, embarrassment burning her face despite knowing she had done nothing wrong. In the back of the police car, separated by a plastic divider, Marie tried to stay calm. She thought about Thomas, wondering what he would do in this situation. Stay composed. Observe everything. Remember details. Don't escalate. The radio crackled with codes and voices. Outside her window, the officer was talking to someone on his phone, glancing occasionally at her. Marie closed her eyes and tried to think clearly. This was just a mistake that would be cleared up soon. But a nagging voice in her head reminded her of stories she'd heard from patients, friends, and the news. Not everyone got the benefit of the doubt. Not everyone had mistakes cleared up soon. As the patrol car pulled away from her vehicle, now being loaded onto a tow truck, Marie noticed her hospital badge had fallen to the floor of the police car. Her full title was visible: Dr. Marie Johnson, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. Next to her name was the hospital's motto: Healing Hands, Caring Hearts. The irony wasn't lost on her as her own hands remained cuffed behind her back and she was driven toward the police station, away from her home, her patients, and any sense of security she had felt just 20 minutes earlier. What Mary didn't know was that across town, the real robbery suspect was already miles away. And halfway around the world, her husband Thomas was about to lead his team into a mission from which he might not return. The sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain as Lieutenant Commander Thomas Johnson crouched behind a ridge. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cooling system in his tactical gear. 6 other men lay in position nearby, their faces streaked with camouflage paint, waiting for his signal. None of them had slept more than 3 hours in the past 2 days. "Eagle Eye, report status." Thomas whispered into his comm device. "All clear, Commander," came the hushed reply from his spotter, positioned half a mile away. "Target location remains active. Count is still at 12 hostiles." Thomas checked his watch. The operation was running exactly on schedule. His team had been tracking a high-value target for weeks, and now they were positioned to complete their mission. In 6 hours, they would move in, extract the intelligence they needed, and disappear like ghosts. Standard procedure. Almost routine, except nothing about Delta Force operations was ever truly routine. What wasn't standard was the red light blinking on his secure satellite phone. Emergency messages could only come through this channel during blackout operations, and only for truly critical situations. Thomas felt a twist in his gut, but pushed the feeling aside. The mission came first. He would check the message during their scheduled communication window in 4 hours. Back in their quiet suburban neighborhood, the news of Marie's arrest spread quickly. Betty Chen rushed home after witnessing the arrest and immediately called the Johnsons' next-door neighbor, Robert Washington. "They took her away in handcuffs. Robert." Betty's voice shook with disbelief. "Al Murray, the woman who saved my grandson." Robert, a retired Army surgeon who had become friends with Thomas during neighborhood barbecues, immediately sensed something was wrong. "Did they say why?" "Something about a robbery. But that's impossible. Marie was working at the hospital today. I saw her leave in her scrubs this morning." Robert hung up and immediately tried Thomas's emergency number, knowing full well it might not work. When that failed, he called the base where Thomas was stationed, only to be politely but firmly told that Lieutenant Commander Johnson was unavailable and could not be reached. "This is a family emergency," Robert insisted. "I understand, sir," the young officer on the other end replied, "but Commander Johnson is currently on a classified assignment with communication blackout protocols in effect. I can forward a priority message, but I cannot guarantee when he'll receive it." "Then forward this. His wife has been wrongfully arrested. He needs to know immediately." At the base operations center, the message sat in a queue flagged as family matter, high priority, but not mission critical. The communications officer, following standard protocol for operators in blackout status, added it to the packet that would be transmitted during the next scheduled window. Had he known the full situation, he might have made a different call. Meanwhile, in the women's holding cell at the police station, Mary sat on a hard bench, still in her wrinkled scrubs. Her wrist hurt where the handcuffs had been too tight. She had been allowed one phone call, which she used to contact the hospital's legal department. The night shift lawyer promised to look into it, but warned her it might take until morning to sort everything out. A young woman with bloodshot eyes sat down beside her. "First time in the tank?" she asked. Marie nodded, too exhausted and worried to speak. "What they get you for?" "They think I robbed a store," Mary said quietly. "But I was in surgery." The woman laughed bitterly. "Yeah, and I'm actually the Queen of England. Nobody in here is guilty, according to them." She looked Marie up and down. "Though you don't look like the usual type." "There shouldn't be a usual type," Marie replied. Across the room, an officer appeared at the bars. "Johnson, visitor." Marie stood up, hope flaring in her chest. But instead of a lawyer or colleague, she was led to a visiting room where Dr. Patel, the hospital administrator, waited with a grave expression. "Marie, what happened?" "We have a child waiting for emergency surgery, and you're our only pediatric surgeon on call tonight." Marie's heart sank. In all her worry about herself, she hadn't thought about her patients. Somewhere in the hospital was a child who needed her, and she was stuck here because of a case of mistaken identity. Little did she know that halfway around the world, her husband's red light continued to blink, the message still unread as Thomas led his team deeper into dangerous territory. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made everyone look sickly. Mary sat in a small interview room, her patients wearing thin after 3 hours of waiting. Her scrubs were wrinkled, and she could feel her hair coming loose from its neat bun. The door finally opened, and a detective walked in, carrying a thin folder. "Dr. Johnson, I'm Detective Wilson," he said, not bothering to offer his hand. His tie was loose and coffee stains dotted his shirt. "Let's talk about where you were between 7 o'clock and 8:30 p.m. "I've already told the arresting officers," Mary said, struggling to keep her voice level. I was finishing a surgery at Memorial Hospital until 7:30, then I changed and left around 8 o'clock. There are security cameras, staff who saw me, even the patient's parents who thanked me afterward. The detective flipped open the folder. Inside was a grey photo from what looked like a convenience store camera. This was taken at 7:45 at the Quick Mart on Pine Street. The suspect threatened the cashier with what appeared to be a gun, took $220 from the register, and drove away in a silver sedan, just like yours. Marie leaned forward to look at the image. The woman in the photo was indeed black and had similar build, but the face was blurry and partially hidden by a cap. That's not me. You can clearly see this person has different facial features, and I'm at least 3 inches taller. Cameras can distort height, the detective said dismissively. And we have a witness who picked you out of a photo lineup. A photo lineup? Marie was stunned. When did this happen? I haven't been here long enough for you to arrange that. Detective Wilson ignored her question. We also found a blue sweatshirt in your car that matches what the suspect was wearing. That's my husband's sweatshirt. It's been in my car for weeks. I'm sure you can test it and see it hasn't been worn recently. Mary felt her professional calm slipping. I want to call an actual lawyer now, not just the hospital's legal department. You had your phone call, the detective said. You'll get another chance after processing. Processing? You mean booking me into jail? This is ridiculous. Have you even checked with the hospital? Have you looked at the security footage there? We're investigating all leads, Dr. Johnson. The detective's tone made it clear he wasn't. For now, you're staying here until your arraignment tomorrow morning. The detective left, and Mary slumped in her chair. She thought about the child waiting for surgery, about her husband far away with no idea what was happening, about the complete helplessness she felt in this moment. A young officer came to escort her back to the holding cell. His name had read Officer Carter. Unlike the others, he looked uncomfortable with the situation. Can I at least call the hospital again? Marie asked him quietly. There's a child who needs surgery, and I'm the only one who can do it. Officer Carter hesitated. I'm not supposed to. Please, this isn't about me anymore. A child could die. Something in her voice must have reached him. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then led her to a desk phone in a quieter corner. Make it quick. Marie called Dr. Patel back and explained the situation. Can you arrange for Dr. Lee from County to come in? He can handle the procedure. I'll try, Dr. Patel said. But Marie, this is outrageous. I've contacted our lawyer again, and they're sending someone first thing in the morning. I've also pulled the security footage from the parking lot and your OR schedule as proof. Thank you, Marie whispered, her throat tight with emotion. As Officer Carter led her back to the holding cell, they passed the evidence room where another officer was reviewing her case. Hey, I just got a call from the Quick Mart owner, the evidence officer said to his colleague, not noticing Marie. They found better footage from the outside camera. The suspect's car was actually dark blue, not silver, and the license plate doesn't match our suspect's. Marie stopped walking. Did you hear that? They have evidence I'm not the person they're looking for. Officer Carter gently but firmly continued guiding her forward. That's not my department, ma'am. The detective will handle any new evidence. But as Marie was returned to her cell, she saw Detective Wilson leaving for the night, car keys in hand. The new evidence would sit unreviewed until morning. Halfway around the world, Thomas Johnson finally reached the communication window. As he powered up his secure line, the red light continued blinking urgently. Morning light filtered through the small, barred window of the holding cell, waking Marie from her fitful sleep on the heart bench. Her back ached, and the thin blanket they'd given her had done little against the cold air. The clock on the wall read 7:15 a.m. In just 45 minutes, she would face a judge for her arraignment. The cell door clanged open, and a female officer stood there with a clipboard. Johnson, time to get ready for court. Mary stood up slowly, her body stiff from the uncomfortable night. Has any new evidence been reviewed? There was some footage that came in last night. Not my department, the officer said, the same phrase Marie had heard too many times since her arrest. You'll be meeting with a public defender for 10 minutes before your hearing. At the hospital, Dr. Patel paced his office anxiously. He had been on the phone since 6 a.m., calling everyone from the police captain to the mayor's office. So far, no one had returned his calls. The hospital's security team had compiled all the evidence proving Marie's innocence, time-stamped footage of her leaving the hospital at 8:05 p.m., her surgical log signed by 3 other staff members, and statements from the parents of the child she had operated on. "Any luck?" asked Dr. Lee, who had come in during the night to perform the emergency surgery Marie was scheduled for. "Nothing yet," Dr. Patel replied, his frustration evident. "They're processing her like she's already guilty. The arraignment is at 8 a.m., and our lawyer can't get there until 8:30. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Lee said, shaking his head. "She's one of our best surgeons. Anyone who knows her would know she couldn't possibly do what they're accusing her of." "That's the problem," Dr. Patel said quietly. "They don't know her. They just see." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Across town, in the courthouse holding area, Mary sat across from a young public defender who looked even more tired than she felt. His name was Alan Parker, and he was shuffling through her paperwork with the speed of someone who had too many cases and not enough time. "They're charging you with armed robbery, Dr. Johnson," he said, not looking up from the papers. "Given the seriousness of the charge, bail will likely be set high." "But I didn't do it," Mary said, leaning forward. "There's evidence at the hospital proving I was there. And I heard an officer say last night that they found better footage showing a different car." Alan finally looked up. "I'll mention that to the judge, but without the actual evidence in hand, it won't count for much. These initial hearings move quickly. So what's going to happen? Best case, the judge sets a reasonable bail, you pay it, and you're released until trial. Worst case, no bail, and you stay in county lockup until we can sort this out." Mary felt her stomach drop. County lockup. "I can't. I have patients. I have surgery scheduled. There's a child who needs a follow-up procedure tomorrow that only I can do." Alan looked at her with genuine sympathy. "I'll do my best, Dr. Johnson, but the system moves at its own pace." Meanwhile, Thomas Johnson had finally received the emergency message. He sat in a secure communications tent, reading the brief note with growing alarm. "Commander, we need to move in 30 minutes, his second-in-command reminded him. Thomas looked up, his face unreadable. "Get me a secure line to General Wallace." "Now." "Sir, that would compromise our position." "Now, Lieutenant," Thomas said, his voice leaving no room for argument. 5 minutes later, he was speaking with his commanding officer, explaining the situation in clipped, precise terms. "Your wife is a big girl, Johnson," General Wallace said. "She can handle a misunderstanding with local police. Your mission is critical. With all due respect, sir, this isn't a misunderstanding. Something's very wrong. She's a surgeon, not a criminal. I need emergency extraction." There was a long pause on the line. "You know what you're asking, Commander. You're putting your career on the line." "I'm aware, sir, but I need to be there." Back in the courtroom, Mary stood before Judge Harold Reynolds, a stern-faced man who had already processed 20 cases that morning. "Armed robbery is a serious charge," Dr. Johnson, the judge said, peering at her over his reading glasses. "The prosecutor is requesting no bail, given the violent nature of the offense." "Your Honor," Alan began, "Dr. Johnson is a respected pediatric surgeon with no criminal history. She has strong community ties and was at work during the time of the robbery. The hospital has evidence." "Do you have this evidence with you, Counselor?" the judge interrupted. "Not at this time, Your Honor, but—" "Then it's just a claim. Bail is set at $100,000. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. The military transport plane's engines roared as it cut through the night sky. Thomas Johnson sat strapped in his seat, still wearing his desert combat uniform, his face etched with lines of worry and determination. The past 24 hours had been a blur of urgent communications, pulled strings, and a rushed extraction that left his team to complete the mission without him. For the first time in his 15-year military career, he had put personal matters ahead of duty, and the weight of that decision hung heavily on his shoulders. "ETA 90 minutes, Commander," the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Thomas checked his watch, 4:30 a.m. local time. He had been awake for nearly 40 hours straight, but sleep was impossible. His mind kept replaying the terse message from Robert. Marie arrested, charged with armed robbery. Not a mistake, deliberate railroading. Need you home ASAP. Robert had never been one to exaggerate. If he said Marie was being railroaded, Thomas believed him. But why? What could possibly be gained by falsely accusing a respected surgeon of armed robbery? Beside him sat Colonel James Rivera, his direct superior and longtime friend, who had insisted on accompanying him despite the irregularity of the situation. The bail hearing didn't go well, Rivera said, looking up from his phone. Your neighbor Robert just texted. They set it at $100,000. Thomas's jaw tightened. That's 10 times the usual amount for a first-time offender with community ties. Something stinks here, Tom, Rivera agreed. I've made some calls. We'll have people waiting when we land. At the county jail, Marie was being processed into general population. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame as a board intake officer took her fingerprints and mugshot. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She was going to jail with actual criminals for something she didn't do. Name and booking number, the officer demanded, not looking up from his computer. Mary Johnson, 47,291, she replied, her voice barely audible. Speak up. Mary Johnson, she repeated, louder this time. I'm a surgeon at Memorial Hospital. There's been a mistake. The officer finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something almost like pity. Lady, everyone in here is innocent, didn't you know? Turn around, face the camera. The flash went off, capturing her exhausted face, her usually neat hair now disheveled, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and indignation. As the officer handed her a small bag with basic toiletries, another guard appeared. Captain wants to see this one before she goes in, the new guard said. Marie was escorted down a sterile hallway to an office where a heavyset man in a captain's uniform sat reviewing paperwork. The nameplate on his desk read Captain Frank Gaines. Dr. Johnson, he said without looking up. Quite a change from the operating room to the county lockup, isn't it? Marie stood silently, watching him. You know, we don't get many doctors in here, Gaines continued, finally meeting her gaze. Especially not ones charged with armed robbery. Makes me curious. I didn't do it, Mary said firmly. And there's evidence proving that. Evidence your department is ignoring. Gaines leaned back in his chair. Strong words. But here's what I see. A respected professional suddenly accused of a serious crime, evidence that somehow doesn't get processed immediately, an unusually high bail. He tapped his pen against the desk. Makes me wonder who you might have angered. Mary blinked in surprise. You think this is deliberate? I didn't say that. Gaines's face returned to its professional mask. But I've been doing this job for 27 years. Sometimes things happen too neatly to be coincidence. Before Murray could respond, the office phone rang. Gaines answered it, his expression changing as he listened. Yes, sir, she's right here. He looked at Murray with newfound interest. I see. Yes, sir, right away. He hung up and studied her for a long moment. Your paperwork is going to take extra time to process, he finally said. You'll wait in a private holding cell until it's complete. Why? Murray asked, confused by the sudden change. New orders, Gaines replied simply. Seems you have friends in high places, Dr. Johnson, very high places. As Marie was led to a smaller private cell, she had no idea that a military transport plane had just landed at the nearby air base, carrying a man who had moved heaven and earth to get to her, a man who was not about to let bureaucracy or corruption stand in his way. Thomas Johnson was home, and he was coming for his wife. The police station's front desk officer nearly spilled his coffee when the group walked through the door at 6:15 a.m. Leading them was Thomas Johnson, still in his desert combat uniform, his face set like stone. Behind him stood Colonel Rivera in full-dress uniform, two military attorneys in crisp suits, and Robert Washington, who had picked them up from the airbase. The air in the room suddenly felt charged with tension. I'm Lieutenant Commander Thomas Johnson, Thomas said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. I'm here for my wife, Dr. Marie Johnson, who was wrongfully arrested yesterday evening. The desk sergeant straightened in his chair. Sir, visiting hours don't start until. I'm not here to visit, Thomas cut him off. I'm here to secure her immediate release. She's being held on false charges, and we have evidence proving it. The sergeant picked up his phone, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. Captain, you're going to want to come down here. Now. Within minutes, the station's captain and Detective Wilson appeared. Wilson's face fell when he saw the military uniforms. Commander Johnson, the captain said, extending his hand. I'm Captain Reeves. I understand you have concerns about your wife's arrest. Concerns? Thomas's voice remained steady, but his eyes burned. She's a respected surgeon who was at work during the time of the robbery. You have footage proving the suspect's car was a different color than hers. You have hospital security footage showing exactly when she left work. Yet she's sitting in a cell while the real criminal goes free. Detective Wilson stepped forward. Sir, we're following standard protocol. The evidence you're referring to is still being processed. For 24 hours, one of the military attorneys spoke up. That's remarkably slow processing for exculpatory evidence in a case with such a flimsy basis for arrest. We've brought copies of all relevant evidence, Robert said, placing a large envelope on the counter. Hospital security footage, staff witness statements, surgical logs signed by multiple medical professionals, and the emergency surgery she performed on a child at the exact time your convenience store was being robbed. The captain opened the envelope and glanced through its contents, his expression gradually changing from defensive to concerned. Detective Wilson, he said finally, why wasn't this evidence reviewed immediately? Wilson shifted uncomfortably. We had an eyewitness ID. A single eyewitness who saw the suspect for less than 10 seconds in poor lighting, Thomas said. Against multiple pieces of concrete evidence that my wife was elsewhere. There's more. Colonel Rivera spoke for the first time. He placed a thumb drive on the counter. We had our people pull the external security footage from businesses near the Quick Mart. The actual suspect is clearly visible getting into a dark blue sedan, not silver, with completely different license plates than Dr. Johnson's car. The room fell silent as Captain Reeves processed this information. I want to see my wife, Thomas said. Now. Meanwhile, in her holding cell, Mary sat on the small cot, trying to make sense of her changed circumstances. Instead of being placed in general population, she had been moved to this private cell with an actual bed and pillow. A female officer had even brought her a cup of decent coffee and a sandwich. Something had changed, but she had no idea what. The door opened and Captain Gaines appeared. Dr. Johnson, you have visitors. Mary stood up, expecting to see Dr. Patel or perhaps the hospital's lawyer. Instead, the person who stepped through the door made her heart leap to her throat. Thomas, she whispered, hardly believing her eyes. He crossed the small cell in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't mind. She needed to feel his solidity to know this wasn't a dream. How are you here? She asked when they finally broke apart. You were halfway around the world. Not anymore, he said simply, his eyes taking in every detail of her face, the shadows under her eyes, the strain of the past 24 hours. I came as soon as I heard. Captain Gaines cleared his throat. Dr. Johnson, in light of new evidence that has been brought to our attention, we're processing your release immediately. The charges against you are being dropped. Marie looked from Gaines to Thomas, trying to understand. Just like that? After everything that happened? Not just like that, Thomas said, his voice hardening slightly. And it's not over. What happened to you was wrong on every level. There will be accountability. As Marie was led to process her release paperwork, Detective Wilson stood awkwardly in the hallway, avoiding eye contact. Detective, Thomas said as they passed, his voice low enough that only Wilson could hear. We will be having a very detailed conversation about your investigation methods, very soon. The detective's face paled as he watched them walk away, suddenly aware that his career might not survive this mistake. 3 months later, Mary Johnson stood at a podium in front of City Hall, the bright spring sunshine warming her face. Behind her sat a row of officials, including the mayor, the new police chief, and several community leaders. Thomas stood to her right, dressed in his formal military uniform, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. What happened to me could have happened to anyone who looks like me, Mary said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. I was lucky. I had resources, connections, and a husband who literally flew across the world to fight for me. But what about those who don't? The crowd of nearly 200 people listened in silence. Among them were hospital staff wearing blue Memorial Hospital scrubs in solidarity, military families showing support for Thomas, and community members holding signs that read "Justice Reform Now" and "Police Accountability Matters." That night changed everything for us, Marie continued, not just because of what happened to me, but because of what we learned afterward. What they had learned was shocking. Their lawyer's investigation revealed that Marie's case wasn't an isolated incident. Detective Wilson and 2 other officers had a pattern of targeting people of color with weak evidence, knowing most wouldn't have the resources to fight back effectively. The convenience store robbery had been their latest attempt, but they hadn't counted on arresting someone with connections like Marie's. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Johnson Foundation for Justice will provide legal support to those wrongfully accused in our community, Marie said. No one should spend a night in jail for a crime they didn't commit. No one should lose their job, their reputation, or their freedom because an officer didn't bother to check evidence that would prove their innocence. The crowd erupted in applause. Near the back, Robert Washington wiped a tear from his eye, thinking about how close his friends had come to having their lives destroyed. Beside him stood Dr. Patel and the parents of the child Marie had saved that fateful night, all there to support the couple who had turned a personal injustice into a community movement. After the press conference, as the crowd began to disperse, a young officer approached Marie and Thomas. They recognized her as Officer Carter, the one who had allowed Mary to make that crucial call to the hospital during her arrest. "Dr. Johnson," she said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened. Some of us are trying to make changes from the inside." Marie studied the young woman's face. "Officer Carter, right? You were kind to me that night. It made a difference." "Not enough of a difference," Carter replied. "But I've joined the new ethics committee the department is forming. We need good officers who care about doing things right." "Yes, we do," Thomas said, extending his hand to her. "And we'd like you to work with our foundation as a liaison to the department." Later that evening, Marie and Thomas sat on their back porch watching the sunset. The legal battles were far from over. There were still depositions to give, a lawsuit proceeding against the department, and the criminal case against Detective Wilson and his colleagues was just beginning. But for now, they had this moment of peace. "Do you regret it?" Marie asked, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder. "Leaving your mission, I know what that cost you." Thomas was silent for a moment. His emergency departure had indeed come at a price. He had been reassigned from field operations to training. His career advancement likely stalled for good. The mission he'd abandoned had been completed by his team, but the trust he built over years had been damaged. "Not for a second," he finally said, taking her hand. "Some missions matter more than others." Marie squeezed his hand. "The foundation is going to make a real difference. Already 3 cases have been reopened based on our lawyer's findings." "That's just the beginning," Thomas said. "This was never just about what happened to you. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." As night fell over their neighborhood, lights came on in houses up and down the street. Many belonged to people who had stood by them during the ordeal, bringing food, offering support, speaking up when it mattered. Their community had rallied around them when they needed it most. "We're not done," Mary said, looking out at those friendly lights. "Not by a long shot." Thomas smiled in the darkness. "No, we're not. We're just getting started." And they were. What had begun as one woman's wrongful arrest had sparked something much bigger, a movement for accountability, for justice, for change. One that would ensure that the next person wrongfully accused wouldn't have to rely on having a Delta Force commander for a husband to receive the justice they deserved.